Hey folks, what we got here today is a 2006 CBO Ultra Classic. This bike we bought, weren't sure what we were going to do with it. Good friend of ours bought it. It's got the Screaming Eagle 103 in it, come from the factory. It's got Baker transmission that we're going to be putting into this bike because the original 5-speed transmission was completely blown up. All the paint has been restored already by a good friend of ours, Shane Baker, up in Edmonton. And man, does that paint ever look good. We're doing a Thundermax CFI module, stainless 2-in-1 exhaust system, 16 or 18-inch 8 hangers, and an 8-speaker Rockford Fosgate stereo system, along with front and rear radar and parking sensor / jammer. So you guys are not going to want to miss this build. It's going to be a lot of hours, but it is going to be a nice bike when it's done. Probably one of the nicest ones I've ever done. Well, the first thing we're going to do is get these broken handlebars out of the way and pull these forks out, change the guts from my custom Race Tech front end that I had on my own bike. I'm going to put that in here. I'm going to put the suspension on the back so we get the bike sitting back on 2 wheels, and we can kind of build around that. Then you're going to take your caps off the top of your forks. Stem nut off the top. Get the brake calipers out of the way with the original brake line, because they're all going to be replaced with nicer ones. And we're putting taller bars on this bike too. I know this bike's been up in the air a few times, so we're going to pull this bike out, replace the front wheel bearings. We're going to put a new tire on here as well. The neck bearings are going to get replaced. Now that we've got our forks out, I'm going to take that adjusting nut off the top. If you don't have a special tool for that, you can use a nice soft brass punch so that you don't ruin the castellation of the nut. And spin it off there. Special tool from Jim's. Basically you slide it in and it hooks on the inside of your neck bearing race to pop it out in with your punch. Same as we did on the Super Glide the other day. Take your new bearing race and an aluminum driver. You just lightly tap it in there. Make sure you start off square. And with that aluminum driver, you're not going to hurt that race. We're going to pull that bottom bearing off with a tool like this. Jim's makes a nice tool like this. But in order to take that off and save your dust shield on the bottom, just want to take a chisel and knock that outer cage off. You get your puller set up like this. All you gotta do is torque on that top puller and it'll pull that bearing race right off. You're gonna want to take your bearings before you install them on that lower tree and give them a good grease. For installing this bearing on the lower tree, I've got a special piece of pipe that's machined that won't touch the outer race because you're gonna have to tap it on the last little part. It's not gonna take much. Just don't want to, you want to make sure you don't tap on the outer cage of the bearings. We're going to slide our lower tree back on with our pinch bolts facing forward. Slide your bearing back on there. Dust shield. And then your castellated retaining nut. And we'll set up the end play, so to say, on your bearings later on. Well, you've got your top tree on the bench here. Might as well install your new polyurethane bushings so you get something to pound against. It's a lot easier on the bench here than on the bike. It'll save you time. And got our top tree on there with our retaining plate, and just loosely set our nut on there. If you look at your nut, it only goes on one way because there's a shoulder on one side. You might as well set your ignition / fork lock back into place, a little Loctite on the screws, and then we'll get our risers back installed. We're going to put our risers back on. We're not going to use the 2-piece riser clamp because a lot of these old bikes, that's why the handlebars would break right in the middle here. We're going to use this 1-piece clamp from Bagger Nation, Polyaphy. It's got set screws in there. It is the original That'll keep your bars from breaking. And also when you go to a taller set of bars, these set screws will keep your bars from turning. Put our cowbells back on. We had to replace one because it had a dent in it. Good thing we had a nice used set to throw on. Always do them as a set so that they look even. I'm gonna get our forks pulled apart. I gotta swap these over because these are just the old aluminum ones on my own bike. Customer's bike has chrome legs, so we gotta swap everything over. That's okay because it's good time to put new oil and seals anyways. Now we're gonna take all these parts and assemble them in the chrome legs. And I can't express enough how important it is to make sure you are clean. Start with a clean workbench, wipe it off with some brake clean, get rid of all the dirt, clean all your parts, new fork seals, new bushings, every single time. And do not buy cheap parts. We got all our parts cleaned up, laid out here. Now we're going to start assembling these forks. Snap our bushing into our new tube. Straightforward. Snap it into place. Make sure it sits up properly. Bushing for your leg. Washer on top of that. Put that together. I got this bullet to put on top. That'll assemble our seals. You never want to assemble a seal dry. You want to put a little bit of fork oil on your seals. Make sure you put the right seal, part the seal down. Tie that together. Go. New retaining clip in there. And you are done. We're going to put oil in these forks. To put oil in these forks, you got to put your gold valves in. Make sure they're seated properly, which helps to do with your springs. Just give a little bump. No springs. You want to pour your oil in there.
Who's ready for a little trip down memory lane with some Armin classics?
And I like to pull up on my tube, put my hand over top, and push down to get all my bubbles out. Do that a few times until you're sure you got all your bubbles out. You'll be able to feel it when your fork is full of oil. And if you look inside your tube, you'll be able to see bubbles and hear them coming out if there's still air in there. Then once you're dead certain you have all the air out, you want to set your level from here to here on your fork oil suction tool to 160 on these forks. And just pull until you have no oil, and then you know you have your fork oil set right. Then you can drop one washer in, you can drop one spring in, and I like to always make sure my numbers are facing up, just a habit to be in. Oilands has their numbers written right on top here. Racetech has their spring numbers written right on the side here. Then you're going to want to put another washer on top, and then you're going to screw your cap on. Spacer. Then you want to screw your cap on. Then when you get your forks together, you want to slide them through the bottom. Carefully put your rubber bumpers on. Put your cap with your seal in through the top tree to hold everything together. folks, hope you guys had a good weekend. We sure did. We had 2 birthday parties. My grandma turned 90 yesterday, so we had a big party for her, and yeah, that was cool. Anyways, I'm gonna flow a few days together just to show you guys some good content and make one video worth watching. Last week we did fork seals in these. We put some Racetech suspension in these forks, along with some Racetech cold valves. And so today we're gonna tighten this all up, tighten up our top caps, set our Timken taper end play, so to say, fallback, whatever you wanna call that, tighten up our pinch tubes on the front, put our new painted fender back in, so you're gonna see a little sneak peek what this bike's gonna look like, and you know, roll the wheel in with new tire bearings, blah blah blah. So let's get started. Put your top caps back into your forks. You don't forget that little rubber round square seal that goes in there. We just did a frame swap on the trike and they were gone, so if you don't put those in, you're eventually gonna get oil sweeping down the tube. Now we're gonna put the front fender on, but before you slide the fender in, there's 4 little aluminium washers that sit between the fender and the fork leg. Pretty tough to hold those in place, so I like to use something like wood glue. Put a little bit of wood glue on these washers. The wood glue will not hurt your paint, and it's tacky enough that it's going to hold the washer in there. And then you can, once the fender's tightened up, you can just wipe off what's there with water. You've got all 4 bolts tightened up for your fender. Now you can see that beautiful CDO green color that we had all the paint restored by a friend of ours in the city, Shane Baker. Once you got all 4 of these bolts tightened up with a little Loctite on them, there's a little retaining plate inside. You want to fold the tabs over. So now we're going to put a new tire on this bike, because this tire is really old and it's starting to crack along the inside of the treads here. We're also going to brace these wheel bearings because they're wet around the outside, so the grease is coming out, and they just feel not smooth anymore. You've got your axle nut tightened up and your pinch clamp on the right side. That's all there is to it. And man, does that ever look pretty nice. We're done with our front end for now. We're going to leave this snap-on fender protector on to cover up this expensive paint for now. I'm going to switch to the back end. Now what we're going to do is we're going to pull the rear wheel out, pull the swing arm out, inspect all our rubber cleave blocks, swing arm pivot. We're going to pull the oil pan off, flush it because it's been sitting open for a while, even before we pick this bike up. So we want to make sure there's absolutely no dirt in there, clean this all up, and get ready to put our new drive belt back on, and our Baker 6-speed transmission as well. What we're going to do is pull both our rear shocks off. You might as well throw these in the trash because no one's ever going to put them on. And we're going to pull these steel cleat blocks out. Then we can yank our axle out, lift our bike up, pull our wheel out. And you're going to want to hold your 11/16 nut on either side and spin the nut off on one side so you can get your pivot. Now you've got your swing arm out, and we can slide our new belt in there and replace any of these rubber blocks if we need to, that sort of stuff. The transmission's been pulled apart already because if you look at these teeth, she had a major grenadation. I don't even know if that's a word, but it grenaded pretty badly. So we're going to pull this oil pan off before we assemble this back together and flush out this oil pan just to be on the safe side, and then we'll put the cleaned up oil pan back on, and then we'll put the swing arm back on. The oil pans are pretty easy to get off. There's 12 bolts that go around the bottom. 3/16 ball end Allen works really nice, and then you can get it at a bit of an angle and pull it out. Once you got your oil draining, you can get these bolts pulled out. So now we got our oil pan off, we got our baffle pulled out. Yes, it's dirty, but when I hold a light in there, it doesn't look shiny or glittery, so that's good. We're just going to clean this up really good. I hope that if you guys are watching, you can see what's wrong here. You can see here all these plates are not lined up because the rotor actually caught the stator. If you look at the center of this rotor, it's round. It's because the splines are gone. So we're gonna take that stator off, throw it in the trash, voltage regulator in the trash, and replace them as a pair. Rule of thumb always is, make sure you put a little anti-seize on your pivot shaft, because I've had these shafts where you almost had to destroy them to get them out because they were so rusted on the raised parts. Once you get your rubber cleat block back in there, you want to make sure you put your spacer back on, but it only goes on one way, you can see. And you want to get your nut, put a little Loctite on there. Very important that that don't come loose. We'll spin that on in a minute. And then the cast part of your cleat block has a chip. There has a little nipple on there. That nipple fits into the rubber part of your cleat block. Some Loctite on your bolts. It goes back in there. This time we're going to be doing things a little different. We're going to be installing a progressive suspension touring link, pro link. What that does is gives you a different cleat block for the right side, bracket that mounts to the bottom of your transmission, and a Heim joint that ties the two together. So what that does is keeps your transmission and motor unit from moving in the frame quite a bit, and it takes a lot of the wobble out. What you're going to do is mount your bracket to the bottom of your transmission oil pan corner. The Heim joint goes on one way with the threaded end on the tranny, and the female end goes on the cleat block. The other side, there's a little tip here. That tip wants to line up in the little groove on the rubber cleat block. That way that it gets your suspension properly aligned straight. Now that we've got that tightened up, everything's lined up, sandwiched together, we can tighten up our main pivot shaft nuts. 11/16 sleeve, you want to make sure you tighten up both Allen bolts for your Heim joint. Torque them to the instructions in your kit. So you can see these are obviously not the right side panels. And that's because we're going to use them as mock-up for mounting these progressive rear shocks. And the external cartridge, we want to mount it so it does sit as close as possible, but will not rub the paint. So you can see now here why we use these mock-up covers. These remote reservoirs mount pretty close. You still want to be able to take them off without rubbing on their reservoirs. Once we get the bags cut and put back on, we'll probably have to fine-tune them a little bit. Alright, so now we got our rear wheel back in, our swing arm back in. We got our progressive shocks on the back. Put some new brake pads in there. And we got our Pro Link in today. Put our front end back together, front wheel, fender, and our risers and riser cap, new riser bushings. Tomorrow we're going to try and put this Baker 6-speed transmission in with all new bearings. And yeah, thanks for watching. Really appreciate you guys watching every day. I enjoy this stuff so much that I do it on my time off. And it's not even really like a job to me anymore. I just really enjoy this stuff. If you guys want to call me anytime with any questions, that's cool. And have a great night. We'll see you guys tomorrow. Thanks.